I'm here with Coach Steve Morris. Steve, thanks for joining me.
Very happy to be here.
Awesome. So, for our listeners, Steve is the author of a new best selling book, What Size Balls Do I Need? Inside the Dizzying World of Youth Sports. And you're also somewhat of an icon in the Los Angeles coach camping world. So, for our listeners, I worked at Coast Sports as a camp counselor for 4 consecutive summers. And it really has had a tremendous impact on so many kids in the LA area. So, other than being a former kid yourself, you have some experience with today's topic, which is the future of being a kid. So, I think a good place to start is there's so much that is universal about being a kid, but also a lot has changed since COVID-19 has happened. So, I'd love to get a sense from you of what has changed from a kid's perspective since COVID-19 began.
Kids have always wanted to just run and do and act on their impulses. And at the same time, they've kind of had this addictive attraction to technology. And so in the past couple of years, and this having been exacerbated during COVID, their grasp of technology has become even more aggressive. I mean, they've had to rely on it, and now it's with parent approval. Previously, parents kind of tried to have a bit of control over what their kids would do, or they would, moderate the use of technology because it is not only is it pervasive, it's just so attractive.
Right.
But with COVID, with kids having to use it and having to be on their screens for school, parents have kind of relaxed their own sort of, restrictions and kind of let the kids go. And I think I've seen over the past few months, especially having done virtual camp um, for the past 8 weeks, parents just they're not monitoring as much, and so kids are just going pretty wild. They'll stay on there. They'll do their school and then they'll play 6 hours of Fortnite. So I think the technology itself is changing the nature of what it means to be a kid.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, they literally banned cell phones. So you couldn't, if they caught you checking your phone in between classes, you would get sent to detention.
And then
Whereas,
just a couple years later, so you were the class of 2010, Griffey in the class of 2017, cell phones were permitted in the classroom.
that's amazing.
So, I
Yeah, and
mean, it's
now kids
just,
are taking their classes online. It's like a full turnaround.
and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah,
I mean, because now that we have no sort of plan for beating back the disease, and we are going online for school increasingly across the country, the kids will be on their screens. And I learned from some of the kids this summer some of their tricks. They basically will turn off their cameras. So even during class, they told me they would turn off their cameras and then be playing games on another device. And they would tell their teachers they had gone to the restroom or whatever. They had to go somewhere else. And the teachers were so burdened by having to look at 30 screens that a couple of kids offline at any given time, didn't really concern them.
yeah,
So, kids who are adept at getting away with whatever they can get away with are going to increasingly use the technology to do what they want.
totally. Yeah, gaming the system. And well, how do you think about the pros and cons of this? Because I could see, on the one hand, you become a digital native if you grow up with tech and you really understand how, like you said, like how to game the system, how to work all the ins and outs of tech, and that may make you a more successful person in our increasingly digital world, especially in the workforce. On the other hand, maybe overuse of technology creates some social issues. Maybe you start to compare yourselves to beautiful, rich, and famous celebrities. So, how do you weigh the pros and cons of having lots of screen time and lots of digital activity?
Well, I think this goes all the way back to the beginning of the conflict between, humanity and technology. This one really starts back in the Industrial Revolution, and it's only increased in velocity, year after year, where the lead time now between technological advances is shorter and shorter and shorter. And so I think that, you know, kids, as you say, are digital natives. They can just pick this stuff up. They can look at any new piece of technology and instantly understand it. It's like they organically understand what they're looking at and then how to, use it, manipulate it, and exploit it. I think that another force in society, the social media world, comes at them a different way. It
Hmm.
further envelops them and draws them even deeper in. And as you said, I think there are going to be resultant social issues. You have the comic cliche of four kids sitting on a couch next to each other, all on their phones, all texting each other instead of talking to each other. I
Right.
think, the technology has changed that. I think it's changed the dating world. Um, Everything is texting. Nobody talks on the phone anymore.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that, kids will become increasingly dependent on screens, or as we go into the next 10 years, not screens, they'll be, I guess, like light sources in the room that, you've seen in various movies, but all this stuff is going to become reality fairly soon.
Yeah.
And so their experiences are becoming more and more insular, and you could see it in their posture. I mean, there is
Mm.
a cell phone posture now where kids are kind of hunched over. They're going to definitely have orthopedic issues in the future. But it's really part
That's
of
why we need
just
smart
becoming,
glasses.
yeah, well, they're going to be contact lenses. They're going
Right.
to be contact lenses that basically have everything on them. We won't really even need screens.
Yeah. Or brain machine
And
interface. You just go right to the source, like Elon Musk's Neuralink.
yeah, but that's all going to be reality in a very short time.
Right.
And I think the kids are both, this stuff is for the kids, targeted at the kids, and it conflicts with their just innate humanity, and sort of beats back the ways we would interface with the world before there was even the word interface. The
Right.
way we just related to people eye to eye. It's relating to people eye to screen.
Yeah, I don't even really know my own opinion on it because I can see that from one perspective, maybe we're just being nostalgic about the monkey days where you would go, run around and hang out in a very physical way. And then on the other hand, maybe it's that going towards a world where you can communicate instantly through just thinking a thought and sharing it with one another. Like maybe that is the future, and fighting it is not something that's even worthwhile because it's become an inevitability. But I guess like taking all that into consideration, if you're a parent of a kid today, your kids are a little bit older now, but let's say you have a really young kid, what age would you say it's okay for them to start having unregulated screen time? And then what age would you think it's okay for them to have their own social media accounts?
Um, Obviously, there's the caveat, it's different for every kid and every family.
Hmm.
I know when my kids were little, when Evan was little, we didn't have any gaming systems. No, what was it in those days? What was your first gaming system?
I mean, I had the
Nintendo
Nintendo 64
64.
was the, I don't know,
Yeah,
it
so
seems
it was
like so
Nintendo
old school now.
64 or PlayStation. I mean, all of them that are all antiques now. Um, and that was at 6. And, we still tried to regulate it. And now this was also 20 years ago.
Hmm.
I think a lot of kids, parents are getting them technology to babysit, sort of like what we did for Evan. So I see 6-year-olds with cell phones. I think that's young.
Right.
I think, there be a sense of responsibility outside of the self and understanding that this is, um, in some level a privilege to have. So I don't know, maybe 10 or 11. It used to be kids would get cell phones when they graduated from elementary school and moved into middle school so that the parents could ostensibly track them if they needed them.
Right. Or they can
Uh,
get a ride home and they're, yeah, so it's a little bit
back,
more
back,
freedom.
right. So it was freedom and security and safety at the same time.
Yeah.
I still think it's a fairly decent age, which is now, fifth or sixth grade, to kind of have your own system, your own phone. But to have a social media account, I know parents are really trying to hold off till kids get into ninth or 10th grade.
Right. And
It's really hard,
do you think that's different for boys and girls? Because there's obviously sort of a different risk level if you have a boy or a girl.
well, I think parents have always looked at girls more protectively, whether, rightly or wrongly.
Hmm.
Um, Boys, on some level, don't care as much about it, except for the gaming sense. They don't
Right.
really care
So
about
maybe
Instagram.
addiction is more of like an issue with some kids.
Yeah. Oh, it's obviously an issue
Right.
more with kids than others, and that's a whole chemical and genetic and a whole lot of other factors that are exacerbated by the technology.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, I was going to say there's this other useful metaphor that I think about a lot, which is that your phone is essentially a digital extension of your brain. So we are already cyborgs to some extent. Like I offload a lot of the things that you used to have to remember, like birthdays and what do I like my calendar, my work schedule, all of these things. I no longer have to remember it. I offload all of that to my iPhone and really to the cloud. So there's obviously the benefit of that where you can be so much more than one monkey brain used to be. Now you can be this whole, plugged into the cybernetic collective. But on the other hand, you're now dependent on that digital brain. And so it's also like balancing how dependent do you want to be on it versus how much do you want to benefit from all of the achievements you can unlock with that digital part of your brain.
well, when is the last time you saw somebody walking around without the phone in their hand? In every picture you
Yeah.
see, there's a phone in somebody's hand. So it has become an appendage. It
Hmm.
really is now part of one's body. And I think like anything else, it depends what you want to do with it. If it's just going to be your source of entertainment or information, then that's one thing. If you're going to use it to expand yourself and use it for research and other sorts of tools, then you do have a computer right at your fingertips,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. Compared to the old flip phones or Blackberries, we now are walking around with computers in our hands.
Yeah. Yeah, managing your attention is the hardest thing now because that's really the scarcest resource of all. Like we have so much overflowing with information and entertainment and all these ways you could spend your time. And a lot of them have been designed to be as engaging as possible, even specifically for kids. So being able to manage your attention. And I think there was one research study where they found that kids that were able to delay gratification, where if you put them in a room and you said, "Here's a cookie, freshly baked chocolate chip cookie. If you can eat it right now, or you can wait 5 minutes and we'll come back with a second cookie." And the kids that were able to wait ended up being far more successful in pretty much every aspect of life going forward.
Except I think the nature of being a kid is a kid will say, I'm eating that cookie now, and I know my parents are going to give me another one in 5 minutes. And so it would have to maybe be the experiential, just sort of result that, well, you're not getting that cookie the second one in 5 minutes, that maybe the next time they'll delay gratification. But it's really difficult because childhood is not about delayed gratification. I think it's built in
Right.
that parents are meeting kids' needs in the moment. So, I think cell phones and computers just make it even more, acute that kids are instant gratification, machines. They need
Yeah.
it now. They can't wait. It's not really, I think, baked into their psychology about patience. There is no
Hmm.
patience up to a certain age. It's all about me, 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 me. And parents feed into that. They feed it and feed into it. So it's difficult for kids to, so I think those are the outliers, the ones who maybe can show some delayed gratification,
Right.
or else are products of better parenting. But I think that's, the exception rather than the rule. I think most kids seeing that cookie would just take that cookie. They have
Yeah.
no concept of time. So you're telling them, wait 5 minutes and you're going to get another cookie. 5 minutes is an eternity for a kid.
Right. When you grow up watching
So,
TikToks, can you imagine like getting a kid to watch Citizen Kane or some like movie like that, or read a
well,
full book rather than just read some tweets?
it doesn't happen. And I think that all changed back in the early 80s with the advent of MTV and personal
Mm.
computing and other technology like faxes, all coming at the same time where the world instantly sped up. We sacrificed depth for speed and gloss. And so the attention spans of succeeding generations just got shorter and shorter and shorter. I know that when we're watching a movie at home, that Griffey is sitting on his phone.
Right.
He's on his
Yeah,
phone
one
looking at
screen's
his
not
phone.
enough.
The music's playing, or the narrative is playing, but he's missing all of the visual nuance. He's missing anything that is happening in the movie. He can hear it, so he thinks
Yeah,
he's seeing the movie, but he's not processing the movie because the screen is more compelling in front of him. Or
totally.
it's like the analogy of taking a family vacation. You're driving through Monument Valley, Utah, which is one of the most fantastic vistas in the Western United States. And anybody that's seen any Westerns or John Ford movies knows Monument Valley by heart. And the kid is sitting in the back seat, and the parent is driving, oohing and ahhing, going, "Isn't this gorgeous?" And the kid is just staring at his phone. He can
Yeah.
barely look up for a second. If it's not on his phone, he won't see it. If you can somehow stream the car camera into his phone and he can see Monument Valley as he's driving through it while he's on his phone, then he'll see it. Otherwise, no
Right.
interest.
Yeah. Now, there's this other interesting phenomena I've noticed, which is that it used to be like when I was growing up, you pretty much just had to believe that what your parents were saying was true. You had no way of fact checking them. Like, it's not like you're going to pull out the Encyclopedia Britannica and thumb through it and find
Right.
something. But nowadays, you can literally fact check your parents and your teachers in real time. And so I wonder if this is going to lead to like sort of a know-it-all mentality where maybe they think they know more than they really do, or maybe it's a good thing and it'll actually allow for us all to agree on a set of facts. So I'm curious if you've noticed that or thought about that phenomena at all.
Well, I've seen it again. Sorry, Griffey, you're right in this, but Griffey has started quoting Twitter as his news source. And so we'll say something and we'll have referenced, either one of the major newspapers or sort of, traditional media sources. And Griffey will go to Twitter and say, no, that's not what they're saying here. And so I think that, yes, there's a know-it-all-ism that's possible. But again, when teachers wouldn't let you use online sources for your papers because you
Right.
don't really know the validity of the source. There's a bias that's baked into anything that's, on the internet. Even going back to the old encyclopedias, there was a bias as scrubbed as it could be out. But whoever's writing that is putting a little bias in there. It's
Right.
so it just depends really how overt the bias or the legitimacy of the information is. And that's tough to filter out, and it's tougher to filter out for kids who are so impressionable and have less experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big change that it used to be biased, but it was kind of a biased set of facts that everyone agreed on. Whereas
Right.
now it's like a post-truth world where we recognize that everything is biased. So you really have to figure out your own beliefs by taking information from all different types of biased sources. And that seems like a
And I
big
don't think
change.
Yeah, and I don't think kids have the tools for that. I think they will gravitate to the shiniest, glossiest, brightest, loudest thing that they see, and that might be their source.
Hmm.
So it's difficult because you can't have a lot of experience at 8 or 10 or 12. It
Yeah,
takes a lot of years. The word experience basically, you need time to have experience.
totally.
Um, so it's really tough. I think it's not a bad thing that kids want to reach and do research and fact check on some level. But when it gets obnoxious, it could be a little much. But kids are also meant to be obnoxious. There is that sort of basic kiddom that parents really try to, kids are unsocialized beasts. They are savage beasts. And
They
it's the
like pushing
process
buttons just to see what'll happen, I've noticed.
because that's how they learn. It's like
Right.
the little kid sitting in the high chair, and their parents are feeding her, and they're having a great time, and all of a sudden she gets this little gleam in her eye, and then decides to push dinner onto the floor.
Right.
And the parents, go, "Don't do that. Come on." And they pick it up and clean it up and put it back on the high chair shelf and on the tray, and then boom, pushes it again. So I
Right.
mean, that's how kids learn limits, is pushing buttons
Yeah, the
and trying
Yetza
to figure
Hara,
out,
I think is the Yiddish
yeah,
term for it.
yeah, exactly. They're trying to figure out the limits of their universe.
Right.
And, by pushing buttons and pushing the envelope and how far, how fast, how high can I go before I crash and get hurt is what a
Yeah.
lot of them will.
So what is the best response then if that's what kids are naturally going to do? Like let's say you have that a girl and she's in her high chair and she keeps spilling over the food time after time. Like what are you supposed to do? Do you just keep giving her more food or do you maybe let her go hungry one time so she realizes that's what happens? What would your
Yeah,
advice be?
yeah, no, look, and I'm no parenting paragon, but I think that I guess an enlightened parent would, keep picking it up a couple of times and then just take it away and say, no, no, we don't do that
Right.
until, the kid has her tantrum and calms down, and then you can try again. But I think it's a constant, as the kid is experimenting, I think the parent is experimenting with, his and her response as well.
Right. It's like a battle of
And as often
willpower
as not,
almost.
yeah, it's a battle of wills. It's a test, and both sides get it wrong constantly.
Yeah.
Which is why we have a flourishing, psychology profession.
Right.
So, there's only so much you
Yeah.
can do, and all the parenting handbooks that are out there that go unread, um, you can't win. So, you can only try so hard.
Right. Yeah, the image that came to my mind is in the book Musashi about the greatest Japanese samurai in history. He talks about how in swordsmanship it's always a battle of the will. And so he would be standing completely still in the snow, eyeing his opponent with snow, collecting on their hair and their nose and everything. And as soon as you would notice the other opponent flinch, you knew it was all over and you had won the battle. And I feel like it might be kind
Right.
of like that. I mean, I'm not a parent, so I don't really know, but awesome. So I'd love to talk about sports now and the role of sports with upbringing and knowing your limits and learning and really what the role of sports is and why it's important for kids to go through organized sports and maybe some of the misconceptions that parents have going into it. So, what advice would you give for both parents and kids who are just starting out in their organized sports career?
I think that is sports is a wonderful venue for exploring oneself, for exploring the bounty of what a family can bring, and for learning values, for learning self-esteem, for learning teamwork, for actually growing into who you want to be in the adult world. I think parents parents just starting out often make the mistake of imputing their perspective onto the kids in how they're going to go through their sports career. So they see them
Mm,
almost as little professionals. And the truth is that sports started out as a game. Sports are recreation, sports are fun. And that's why kids gravitate to them. They
hmm
like kicking and throwing and running and jumping. It feels good. And that's what they want to do. They want to try more things that feel good. And what happens is the parents will get them into little kid classes and the kids will like them. And then when they get to 5 or 6 years old, they'll move them into the first stirrings of organizational leagues. And what I found after years and years and years of watching my own kids is the second that we start imposing structure on the game and where kids are expected to develop and to get better. And
mm,
if they're good, they have to become great. And if they're great, they have to be the best. From the second they have responsibility to their teammates, where they have to show up, where if they're tired, they still have to go to a game or a practice. Where when sports starts to become a job and an obligation, and starts to lose its innocence and purity, and kids will start pushing back. And this is when you see kids start burning out and wanting to leave teams and leagues. So I think parents need to, as kids get older and go through these various steps, they need to make sure that whatever program the kids are in, the kids are still having fun. That it's not
Yeah.
just about getting better, getting on a better team, getting the next step, doing this so that you'll be able to get into high school, or the parents who are pushing 6-year-olds for their future college scholarships. That's missing the point. The point
Right.
is to try and keep it as fun as long as possible, because that's when kids will want to keep doing it. And sports can go on through their life. It doesn't have to end at high school or college. A couple of years ago, I started an adult league for women. I started just moms soccer classes because this generation of moms, most of them hadn't played organized sports. They had watched their kids go through it. They didn't really have an understanding of what their kids were doing or how hard their kids were working. But just getting them out onto the field and playing and running, and these then 40-year-old women who are 60-year-old women are all many of them are still playing and playing in leagues.
That's
So
great.
sports can be a lifelong pursuit. The goal for parents is not to burn their kids out when they're 12.
Right. And I've noticed that same sort of thing where if there's a little kid who's maybe doing like a goofy dance, as soon as the parent comes over with the cell phone is like, "Oh, do that goofy dance for me." Then the kid is like, "Oh, I'm over it." So
Yeah,
it's
there's a spontaneity that you kind of can't recreate. And
yeah.
you'll see kids will be on the field, they'll do something, and then they kind of have like this spasm of craziness. Whereas you said they'll just do a crazy dance. They'll kick a ball, nobody's looking at them. They do this little celebratory dance, this little celebration, and then they go back to focusing on the game. There are those
Hmm.
little moments where you can't explain them, but it's just kind of like the essence of kids spilling out.
Right.
And you can't control it. You don't want to control it. Parents might want to manipulate it or get it on film because it's funny, show it to the grandparents. But
Yeah.
kids operate in a different time zone. It's like when if a team loses a game and the parents are just bummed out and the kids are bummed out and the coach will really hang on to it. But the kids will let go of it by the time they get to the restaurant and have their French fries. They're done.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the half-life for misery with a kid is really short.
Yeah.
So,
Oftentimes the
we just have
losses
to
are
recognize
harder on the parents than the kids.
more than oftentimes,
Yeah.
and I think so that feeds in again to the parents. Parents project their expectations onto the kids,
Yeah.
and that's when it starts to get ruined for the kids.
Totally. Now, you also talk about the 10-year window in your book where, this is essentially from the time where a kid first starts playing organized sports until their last game of high school. And it occurred to me when I was reading your book that originally sports were preparation for battle, especially lacrosse. Like that was like your mock warfare that would prepare you so that when the real thing came, you could work as a team, you could play your hardest, you knew what to do. And I wonder if there's some sort of parallel with the real world where if you've played on team sports and you've spent those 10 years well, then maybe you're more prepared to be on whether it's a team at a company or a nonprofit organization or anything, or even a marriage, maybe. So, do you think there are some parallels there, even though we're obviously not sending our kids into battle like we used to?
Oh, absolutely. I think in my own life, my years in sports and camp totally informed my outlook on life and how I related to people and how I wanted to be with people in different organizations. And the teamwork, the cooperation, the striving for the same goal, the attacking problems collectively. It's how I've actually moved through my entire life and all the way I had my college relationships, and then when I worked in television production, and when I started my own camp, and the way I used to coach my teams. It becomes like this collective. It's another version of the family unit. That's what a team is. And
Hmm.
if you can take those lessons and those the force, the power that you get, it's a force multiplier being on a team. And I know a lot of the kids that have been through my programs now, when they're questioned about what sports meant to them, they talk about how they learned about leadership, how they've, learned about focus and self and sacrifice for a larger goal. And I see them now entering the business world, and they're using all of these tools, and they feel where they feel way more prepared than if they hadn't played sports. They don't
Yeah.
really have that frame of reference, but they're just feeling very prepared based on what they learned and what they took from sports, that, the decade that they played on teams and with other people, and, sort of explored and developed themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think there's a difference between team sports and solo sports? Because it does seem like what you get in something like soccer or basketball or football or lacrosse might be different than if you're on, say, like a swim team or tennis or
Or
golf. And
tennis.
there's some team aspect to it, but it's not quite the same where in the moment you're depending on your teammates. Would you suggest that, if parents maybe have like at least one like team sport that their kid plays on, or do you think there's benefits to
Yeah,
both?
I think there are benefits to both, but I think, they derive there are different benefits.
Hmm.
I think individual sports will maybe, teach you a greater self-reliance. You really do
Hmm.
have no one else to rely on but yourself. And so that might give you a stronger sense of self, um, where you do get to, shunt some of that off on your teammates. On the field, there are more of you there. But I think that sports in general, they teach you so many lessons, including a sense of a will to be greater, a will to excel, a will to push yourself, to test your limits. I think, that's common to individual and team sports. I have a friend whose kid is a fencer. And there's nothing really more individual than being on that strip against, it's mano a mano with your épée. And but there's a team. He's part of the fencing team, and they try to cultivate the whole team thing within that. So every kid is
Yeah.
standing on the edge of the strip, rooting for his teammate, to win the match. And I
Yeah.
think that will translate as well. I saw that on the swim teams at Brentwood when Dory was on the swim team. Everybody's standing there cheering at you in your lane as you're swimming. So you do get that teamwork thing. It's just a little differently expressed.
Right. Awesome. Well, I have some rapid fire questions I want to ask you now, and then we'll get into the future scenarios. So, are you ready?
Okay, sure,
All right.
sure.
The first one is about college. So, right now, there's the issue of a lot of colleges are going fully online, but they're paying full tuition or they're charging full tuition. Do you think it's worth it? Or what advice would you give to a kid who's considering what to do in the year 2020, 2021, if it's full remote classes but full tuition? Is it worth it? What should they do?
I mean, that's a rough one. And kids and parents are really wrestling hard with that right now. Um, I think if school has gone online, but you're in the facility, you're on the campus, there is at least the experience, however limited, of being in the college setting. Um, it could be worth it. A lot of schools right now are doing freshmen and sophomores are there one semester, and juniors and seniors will be there the other semester. So they're trying to work with it. Look, you can see the college point of view. They can't go broke. They've got to
Right, right.
somehow, but the parents are taking out loans. So I know a lot of kids. I know one kid whose school is online, and he and some friends are just renting a motor home, and they're going to go cross country and find Wi-Fi
Wow, that's
spots,
pretty
do their
cool.
work, and keep traveling. Um, so I think you can be creative, and I think it also depends on what year of college you are. If you're a senior, and there's no pressing immediacy to get into the work world, you might want to take off, or some kids might take off the year, do a gap year, maybe work, maybe intern somewhere to come back to have the on-campus senior year. I think on campus for freshmen is also pretty important because that's the whole beginning of the process.
Yeah.
Um, Sophomores, I think, can go either way. Sophomores can, do it or not. I think there's no real answer, and I
Right,
think,
it depends on the case.
representing that is all of the news stories and all of the conflicts and all of the freaking out on every campus and every parent. I think it's ultimately an individual question in your household, what you want to do, what your kid wants to do. I know all the parents of freshmen are off taking their kids to Texas and Colorado and Michigan right now, and everybody's hoping for the best.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, well, here are some prediction questions. By what year will machines become as intelligent or more intelligent than humans?
I think they're on their way. I think by 2030, I think we're going to see a greater reliance on machine learning and AI. I think it's unstoppable. I think by 2050, we'll totally be in Terminator territory.
Yeah,
But I think within the next 10 years, it's really going to become not only pervasive but accepted.
yeah, I'm with you. Next question. Will sufficiently intelligent machines also be conscious or have consciousness?
I think it's kind of like the calculus of approaching the limit of zero. You'll get really, 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 really close, almost to the point where you can't tell. But I don't think they can become entirely conscious. That's sci-fi stuff
Yeah,
of grafting human brains into machines, or going the other way, doing the RoboCop thing where you just build the armor around the body itself. I think they'll be really close and at some point almost indistinguishable. But I don't think you get completely there, like, a machine having a soul. I don't know if you get there. I think
okay.
the replication of emotions we'll see.
Here's another prediction question. What will the average lifespan be of a kid born today in the year 2020?
Well, I one of my old college roommates predicted that we are almost at the age of the end of disease.
Mm,
That we will soon, because of genetic techniques and advances in medicine, that we will be able to slow down aging. There's a whole school out there. There's research being done up in the Bay Area, and there are even medications now
hmm.
where they're dealing on the cellular level with repair and even regeneration and prolonging life expectancies. I think, now it's in the late 70s and early 80s, depending on what country and which gender you are. It'll probably get closer to 100,
Yeah.
in the next 30 or 40 years. But then
Are,
the question is, what is the world going to be like, and do you want to live that long in this world?
mhm.
So I think a different, that's an ethical issue as well.
Yeah,
As the world, as we deal with climate change and environmental catastrophes and loss of ecosystems, what are we actually going to be living in? It gets very dystopic.
totally. Well, here's a related question to that. What will be the most sought after job by kids in the year 2030?
Right now it's engineering and coding, but I think that
Hmm.
I also heard the statistic that the kids that are entering college now, 80% of the jobs they're going to have haven't been invented yet.
Right.
So I think, it's changing so fast and it's going to continue to change, but I think it's going to be, it's going to be technologically based. And yet there'll have to be a service factor as well, because, as the population ages, we're going to need more people involved in that industry of taking care of the aging population.
Totally. All right, last rapid fire question.
Okay.
What one piece of advice would you give to every kid in America right now if they all heard you right now?
Um, have as much fun as you can for as long as you can.
Love
There is
that.
no pressing need to become an adult. There is no pressing need to start planning your future. It's going to come fast enough. It's going to smack you in the head before you know it. So while you're a kid, be a kid, stay a kid. That doesn't mean don't work in school. That doesn't mean don't listen to your parents. That doesn't mean don't follow rules. But just relax. Don't be pressured. Enjoy yourself as long as you can because, kiddom is finite
Mm,
and you're not going to be a kid forever.
yeah. Awesome. Well, let's get into the future scenarios now. In your mind, what is the worst case scenario for the future of being a kid?
Worst case scenario.
I think the worst case scenario in the future of being a kid is to have so much pressure on you to perform and to be mature and to have responsibility at such an early age that you lose that essence of what it is to be a kid, that because you have access to so much technology, that it just turns you so inward that you lose the ability to enjoy what's your surroundings, um that are calling out to you, but you can't hear them because you're so focused on your devices or your screens or whatever you're doing on a keyboard. That I think the worst case scenario is kids are going to become even more divorced from their surroundings.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes is from Gandhi, and he says, "There's more to life than simply making it go faster."
Yeah, I think that's the treadmill that we're all on, and
Hmm.
slowing it down is like the challenge and the goal at the same time.
Yeah, awesome. Let's talk about the best case scenario. What is the best case scenario for the future of being a kid?
Best case scenario.
The best case scenario, since technology is ever present, will be that somehow there's an integration of technology and environment, that kids will be able to look at the screen and look through the screen and past the screen into the wonderful world that's out there, that they'll become engaged, that they'll become active, that they will help change the world for the better, because all our hope is now in the youth of today. My generation destroyed the world. We've taken all the money. I'm really sorry. um, and so, there are limited prospects for the generations further down the ladder. But I think that, kids now take their purity, their innocence, their honesty, and they use it for good. They use the technology to expand the world, to make the world better, to help everybody going forward. If kids could do that, I think that really is the best case scenario, and they're our best hope for doing it.
Yeah. And on a policy level, is there anything we could do or that you hope would happen that would make that better for kids? Like, for instance, universal basic income has been suggested. Canada has a child credit. So, maybe Medicare could help, maybe some sort of, universal education. Are there any policies that you think would really be important for us to pass to make being a kid better in the future?
I think all of those things, all those progressive policies are truly important because they free up parents to free up their kids. And anything that we can do to lighten the load of the family, there's a whole political school of thought that we rob people of their incentive by, offering them societal benefits.
Hmm.
I don't subscribe to that. I think that, we give people greater opportunities as we free them up from their most, material concerns of worrying about where they're living or if they're going to eat. So the more of those, you know, issues that we can take away from parents and families, the better off it all is. It washes down over the kids, and
Yeah.
they have a better chance of success if their parents aren't stressed.
Right. It's funny because it sounds fairly extreme to say, universal income, Medicare, but that's already what we offer for senior citizens, which is a great safety net for senior citizens, but we don't extend that same thing to kids, which really, when you're thinking about the future of America, it's like the opportunities and the foundation that kids have growing up is such a big determining factor in what the future of America is going to be like that. And I don't think it has to be an either or, but it does seem like, to your point, if we help out the kids, then that sort of washes over the whole family unit and all of society.
Yeah, I think like universal health care, gotta have it.
Yeah.
Universal child care, gotta have it. Paid for preschool education, gotta have it. There have been so many studies done that show how it benefits
hmm
the
And it's really an
kids and the
investment. It's not like
families.
a waste of money. It's like you're investing in the future of our society.
It's the people that are against this stuff, I think, are short-term thinkers.
hmm
And they're not looking at really, as you said, the benefits. And they're saying, yeah, it's costing this now, but the truth is, in years down the road, how much better off everybody is, in every on every level, in every
Right.
facet.
Maybe if kids could
Um,
vote, they'd get more political capital.
well, hopefully, if kids could vote, hopefully they would vote. The jury's still out on whether the 18 to 30-year-olds are going to turn out to vote. And
Yeah, true.
that block could control the election. If
hmm
all the 18 to 30-year-olds went out and voted, it could happen. It could change. It's the unfortunate, it's the 60-year-olds and over that are doing all the voting, and right now they're entrenched in everything that the system, keeping the system the same. But if the 18-year-olds and their cohort were voting, could change it in an instant.
Totally. Awesome. Well, let's bring it home for the most likely scenario.
Most likely scenario.
I think that when we finally come out of the pandemic, and we will come out of the pandemic, I think then we're going to be confronted by a range of other issues quickly on its heels. I think climate change is going to come fast on its heels, and we're going to have to deal with income inequality and a lot of these other things. So I think that, we're going to be putting out fires, figuratively and literally for the next 10 years. We're going to be doing a lot of triage, and at the same time trying to tackle the larger issues. So it's going to be difficult, and there's a lot of opposition to even any change. Just look at where our country's at right now. But so I think kids are going to continue to play video games, and they're continue to play sports. And you hope that parents are going to come out of the pandemic with a more enlightened attitude of realizing what we've lost in this, 6 months or year and a half, since it started, and maybe be a bit more enlightened in how they deal with their children. But I think that technology, we're going to, the self-driving cars, as an example, we're going to get more comfortable with those, and within the next 10 years, they'll be all over the freeways and everywhere else. And I think the concomitant technological advances will start to become more and more comfortable with, as they, as they make our lives a little, at first more chaotic, but ultimately easier. And we're all about making life easier.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And with freeing up all this time and rethinking your priorities, focusing on what's most important to you and what makes life worth living has never been more important. That's why I love your message about kids being a kid and how important that is. So, do you have any final thoughts for listeners, for readers? Where can people find you?
you could find me at www.whatsizeballs.com, where my book, What Size Balls Do I Need, is also offered. You could find me at my email, coachstevela@gmail.com. And I think a greater message is appreciate what we have. The pandemic is awful, but there is a blessing in this curse. And that is the greater time with family, the greater appreciation of family, of what we have, who we are. And let's see if we can, take that appreciation outside when it's finished, when there's a vaccine, when there's, herd immunity, when we're back to what, normal might be. See if we can be a little better than we were going into it. And I think, if that's the case, then it will not have been a total loss.
Love that. That's a great place to end it. Thank you so much, Steve, and highly recommend your book to all of our listeners.
The best, present, hence the future.
Our computer is picking up a strange signal.
The past, the present, hence the future, baby.
What's the world coming to?
The past, the present, hence the future. The past, the present, hence the future, baby. The past, the present, hence the future.
Will attempt to stimulate consciousness.
The past, the present, hence the future, baby.
Behind the strange signal is an alien
The
intelligence.
past, the present, hence the future. The past, the present, hence the future, baby.
It's possible.
If you enjoy thinking about the future as much as we do, we invite you to join the HTF community. Simply go to hencethefuture.com, scroll to the bottom of the homepage, and add your email address next to the button that says Enter the Void. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at hencethefuture. And, most importantly, we encourage you to please rate and review the show in Apple Podcasts if you haven't done so already. Our team reads and appreciates every single review. Thank you again for listening to today's episode and for staying curious, and we'll see you next week.